So I'm Paul Rowe, introducing you today to the first of our specialist panels. So today we're looking at natural sciences, and we've got panelists from Queensland Museum, where we've got Dean Beasley, Auckland Museum, where we've got Rebecca Bray, Joe Pegler from Eromanga Natural History Museum, which is also in Queensland, and Johno Ridden from Canterbury Museum. So each of those presenters is going to give you a quick 5 minutes overview of work at their institution, and then we're going to have an open discussion with some pre-prepared questions, and you'll also be able to raise questions via the chat box. So first up today, we've got Dean Beasley, and I'll get him to introduce himself and to share the screen.
Can everyone see my slideshow on screen? Okay, good morning. I'm Dean Beasley from Queensland Museum. I work in a group called Collection Services, and we manage 3 collection systems within the museum. So there's Vernon for our collection objects and specimen records. There's PhotoWare, our dams for our images, audio and video. And then we have Imagic DB TextWorks for our library catalog. Vernon has about 1.3 million object specimen records. In PhotoWare we have 100,000 images, 14,000 of which are available to QM staff via a intranet portal. And then DB Text has about 32,000 books and 6,700 serials. Of that 1.3 million catalogued records in Vernon, we have about 200,000 records in a research program called Cultures and Histories. And then the rest is a research program, Biodiversity and Geosciences, 1.1 million. So we're primarily interested in drilling down into those ones in this talk today, 900,000 biodiversity and 162,000 in geosciences. This is a breakdown of those particular specimens in biodiversity. So we have insects are by far and away the largest grouping, and interestingly that's the only collection in Queensland Museum that has any iconic biodiversity specimens. We have the Frederick Parkhurst Dodd collection of butterflies. He was called the Kuranda butterfly man, and he created these beautiful pinned drawers and often turned them into quite artistic displays. The vertebrates there includes birds, mammals and herpetology. Also, we have about 17,000 DNA specimens in the deep freeze that are also databased within Vernon. We share these records via a number of means. So firstly, we share via the Vernon browser. We have about approaching 800,000 natural history records. Unfortunately, only about 2,500 of those have images. In geosciences, we only have 162 records online, and only one of those has an image, unfortunately. And it's not the Muttabuttasaurus, surprisingly. So that's a shame, because that's quite a Queensland iconic fossil specimen that we have here. Interestingly, in Cultures and Histories have quite a different approach, in that they usually don't publish records online unless they do have an image to make it a bit more interesting to the public. So of their 3,000 records that are online, 95% of those have an image. We also share our biodiversity data with Atlas of Living Australia. We've got 800,000 records also available on ALA. And as of October, in the last month, we've had about 118 downloads of 600,000 records from QM dataset. So some of the challenges facing QM, data capture. There's a tendency for our bio staff to predominantly work in Excel and want to run imports. Though not all staff have import privileges, as they have not all been trained or don't do it regularly enough to maintain competency. Another issue is that imports can often result in the creation of duplicates, so sometimes it's just easier for us to manage it through collection services to make sure that we're meeting all the minimum data standards in terms of the application of valuation data to the records when they go into Vernon and the like. Data storage, probably a growing problem for everyone in the museum space. We just have loads of data, images, a growing number of 3D models and video as well, and where to store it. Does it go into our CMS? Does it go into our dams? Or does it go into our electronic file management system? I try to encourage staff to store all their relevant specimen information in Vernon, but I'm aware that, for example, a lot of our DNA sequence data may only be on GenBank or on external hard drives, so there lies an issue for the next molecular scientists who come along wondering where all the raw data is for sequencing that's been done on museum specimens. In terms of data quality, we have over 4,000 duplicate registration numbers to resolve, which impacts financial valuations and can make it difficult auditing specimens. We carry out an annual verification where we have to find a random selection of our samples each year, and that plays havoc with that process. In terms of data delivery via Vernon browser, Paul touched on something that really interests me yesterday, which is the incorporation of the topic file into browser, which I think will be a great way for us to serve species descriptions to the web, because we have a lot of biodiversity records, but I think the public might be interested just in information about particular species rather than all these records about them. We use the Web Messenger Monitor to push data from Vernon to dams via a third SQL database, but currently this process isn't working and it's problematic. There's no integration the other way, so when photographers take images, put them into dams, and we want to get them into Vernon, so they're on the Vernon browser, that's largely a manual process. And then, like everyone, we're just battling with staffing and resource, asked always to do more with less. So that's a quick rundown of QM for you.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that, Dean. Next up, we have Joe Pegler from Canterbury Museum. So if you unmute yourself, Joe, and then share your screen.
Okay, sorry. I'm Joe Pegler. I'm from the Eromanga Natural History Museum, which is in far southwest Queensland. I'm the Museum Services and Laboratory Coordinator here. I was actually born in Canterbury, but I've been over here living on a property for about 28 years. And I became involved in this project as a neighbour to the property where the dinosaurs are. So I started out as a volunteer preparator and doing field work, and now as a senior staff member here at the museum. So Eromanga, 1,000 k's west of Brisbane, so we're a fair way from any major cities. The museum story here started in '98 when Dr. Paul Sereno came out with some Queensland Museum staff, because they had identified that this area was the right geology to possibly have dinosaur fossils, which were then found, the beginnings of them were found in 2004, which started more discoveries. And we have over 80 sites between our dinosaurs and megafauna sites. So there's a lot of field work ahead of us and a lot of preparation, but more sites are being found all the time. So we found Cooper, who is Australia's largest dinosaur. He's 30 metres long and 6.5 metres high. So here's the specimen we have finished, and he will be described this year, and he'll be a new genus and species, which is pretty exciting for us. We first began by building a field station on the property so that we could prepare the fossils, learn to prepare the fossils, and we were trained in field work by Queensland Museum Geosciences staff. And we have, always used them for expertise if we need more, but we're gradually becoming self-sufficient. We can run our own digs now. We're finding more sites. As I said, Zach was another dinosaur we found, and he's pretty exciting because he was found articulated, and we have about 60% of his body, which is really exciting. This is just some of his tail vertebra that we have a group of volunteers working on preparing them. We also have a megafauna collection. In 2011, we were invited to go down to a property near Eulo, which is about 3.5 hours from Eromanga. So we're now bringing new information about megafauna from a new area in Queensland, which is quite exciting. 2008, we established the foundation to start a regional museum. We felt it was really important that these fossils remain in this area where they have a connection. And so we eventually found some funding to build our workshop near Eromanga itself. And that's where we run a tourism facility as well as the science. So we have tours. We have an education facility where schools can come and visit. And we also have our volunteers who come and help us prepare the fossils and depending on their expertise, help cradle and get things ready for going into the collection. We do have other collections, quite an extensive entomology collection, botanical as well, and microfauna. So we find a lot of microfossils in the megafauna, the sediment around the megafauna. So that's something that we're just working on now. And these all have to go into Vernon. We haven't got any of these entered in yet. We also are working towards publishing a book, which is pretty exciting, hopefully to be published next year. And this is where we are at the moment. We are ready in 2021 in March to hopefully open, or we will be opening stage 2 of the museum, which will be our front of house and a theatre. And then we will still use the workshop here until we can build more galleries and laboratories as part of the museum. So just as in regards to Vernon, we're really satisfied Vernon users. We find our challenges aren't related to the program as such or data entry, but physical things. So because we're very small, there's only 3 full-time staff in the admin area, and we're also running the tourism side of things. So we don't have a lot of time for data entry. Our next biggest thing is the distance. Because we're quite a long way from the paleontologists we use and various experts, we have a lot of specimens collected, but don't have that identification on a lot of them yet. So we need that. For example, we have hundreds of microfossil specimens that need formal identification. So that's a process we're going to have to work through, get them identified and then be able to catalogue them. Some of our other challenges also involve the collection, just housing it to avoid temperature fluctuations out here, so from freezing through to 50 degrees in summer, and as well as our dry, dusty environment. So that's another challenge we face out here, but with this new building that will help us do that well. So because our museum is quite young in the scheme of things, we sort of have a long way to go with our collections cataloguing, but we've been pretty patient so far and we will get there. It's just a matter of getting time to do all these things. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope we might have some of you visit us out here one day.
Thanks very much. There's some amazing specimens in your collection. Hopefully I'll get a chance to go out there sometime. Now, Johno's just sorting out his microphone, so I'm going to switch the running order and put Rebecca Bray next from Auckland Museum. So, Rebecca, if you could share your screen. Thanks, Joe.
Morena, everybody. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Rebecca Bray. I'm Senior Collection Manager at Auckland Museum in Natural Sciences. So I oversee the collection management and care of our natural sciences collections. So a bit of a breakdown of the Auckland Museum collections overall. We have 3 main departments with collections. So human history with about 300,000 objects in Tonga. Natural science overall, we have about 1.5 million specimen lots. And documentary heritage have got about 6 million objects. So documentary heritage is currently mainly on Presto, but at the moment scoping moving over to Vernon, but we use Vernon and so does human history as our collection management system. So in terms of the natural science collections and what we have in Vernon, so we cover from dry specimens, wet specimens, types from New Zealand, also around the world in the Pacific. We have a tissue collection and a whole bunch of slides. So they come from New Zealand, the Pacific, and also some of the worldwide collections. And sorry, I'll skip to here. So of what we have in Vernon, we currently have about 900,000 of our specimen records already in Vernon. We just wrapped up an initial cataloguing project that ran over 4 years, where we had technicians specifically doing cataloguing. So we had about 135,000 records go through that program. Part of it was bringing records up to standard and part of it was entering entirely new records. So I think we had about 60-something thousand new records entered into Vernon in that time. So our collections, the largest is botany with about 400,000 records in Vernon and similar amounts of those that are not currently in Vernon as yet, as everyone has their backlog in their collections. We've also got entomology, marine, a land vertebrates collection, paleontology and geology. So where my role mainly sits within our collection is to kind of be looking ahead at how we're going to be using the collections and what infrastructure we need to build into Vernon and to other things to make sure we keep our collection as useful as possible going forward. So in particular, the things I'm looking at, so I've been in the role for about 1.5 years now, so kind of heading towards more of this work is kind of looking at how we deal with molecular data and samples and making sure we're collecting as much data as we can for future uses, revisiting permitting, so rather than just recording what we permit for a collection, but also looking into biocultural labels and traditional knowledge labels, improving our georeferencing continually, either through having mapping within Vernon or looking at sites and collection events and keeping that moving, and also the classification, so how we deal with hybrids, but then also bringing in Indigenous classification or local names of species and how we balance bringing that up to the same importance as we would with scientific classifications. So whether it be we have different relationships within, say, iwi in Northland, where things are related differently to what we would consider in the science world when we're thinking Linnaean and taxonomy. So how we're going to be doing that within a database. So that's a brief rundown of Auckland Museum and where we're heading. Thanks, everyone.
It's excellent. Thanks for that, Rebecca. Now, I'm not sure whether Johno has managed to resolve.
Well, can you hear me?
Oh, that's perfect. Yep, that's great.
Yeah.
Excellent timing. All right, I'll pass over to you, Johno. If you can share the screen, please.
Right, yes. Sorry about that, everyone. I had a tech nightmare. I'm sure we all know what that's like. So, kia ora koutou. My name is Johno Ridden. I'm Associate Curator of Natural History at Canterbury Museum. I've been here for about 4.5 years, and I've been the Associate Curator for the last year. Before that, I was a collection technician in natural history, so I've been working across all of the collections, the natural history collections at the museum here, so geology, vertebrate, invertebrate, ethanol, spirit-based collection. So the museum holds 2.3 million objects. estimated across human history and natural history. So we use Vernon for a range of objects, which means that there's cross-compatibility to deal with. My main interest is in invertebrates and invertebrate data, so I'm starting to work on trying to get our collections to a standard where we can share them online, but we've got a lot of strengths in invertebrate and fossil paleontology as well. Some of the challenges that I face, or we face, as generally legacy data. So we've got lots of data over a long period of time. It's not in the sort of the right format, the same format. So it's trying to figure out ways to manage that. Standardization is trying to figure out what other institutions are doing and how they're managing their data, and trying to get our data singing along to the same song sheet. And yeah, so I haven't had a lot of experience with the database management side of things, but sort of trying to think about how users and catalogers and technicians can get data or figure out how to use Vernon and make it more applicable for natural history collections and make it more accessible. So that's a quick snapshot for me.
Excellent, thanks for that. If I can ask all of the panelists then to unmute your microphone, and then we'll move on to general discussion topics. So we had a set of pre-prepared questions which we've sent out to the panelists. So I'll run through a selection of those, but we have had one question from the audience so far. So Dean, you're recording some data outside of Vernon, for example, the DNA sequencing, and there was a question as to whether you've got any process for managing the connection between Vernon and that data. Are you noting in any way in Vernon that there is more information about a particular specimen elsewhere?
Basically, as I understand it, all we're really doing at the moment is putting in the GenBank accession number into the other ID field. But I mean, I'd be keen to incorporate sequence data into Vernon itself and actually add the AB1 files, for example, to the photo AV record or the document file, I suppose, as a means to have all your information in one place. Currently, it's kind of scattered on different computers, different external hard drives, and once new molecular biologists come along, where do they go to get that data?
And I think recording the unique identifier from the parallel system is the minimum that you want to be doing. At least you then know on the specimen record that this is a key that you can look up in a separate system and find that data. But as you note in the document references page in Vernon, you can link to any different external file type as long as it's stored somewhere accessible on the network or to a web address. So we have had clients that are linking to external data repositories where there is a permanent web page that represents that record in another system.
But the interesting thing is that it's like, I mean, it's one thing to put a link to GenBank from Vernon in a field there, but what is published on GenBank is usually edited sequence. It's been, people have made snips and corrections there, and ultimately, researchers probably actually want to look at the raw data and make their own interpretation of that raw data. And I think that's what we actually should be storing as well as those concatenated sequences.
Yes. Then the next question overlaps with one of our questions, which was just general management of the electronic data. So I'll ask that to all the panelists in terms of what kinds of processes you have for managing the related media files for the specimens in your collection. Rebecca, I'll pass to you first because I know that Auckland Museum's been doing quite a bit of work in that area.
So we're trying to develop a still image management system. We've hit some hitches, so we're probably going to be doing a bunch more work. But we have developed policies in the medium term. So basically having a long range view of when we get a full dam system in place, which we don't currently. So we're currently working on we have archived large files. So the original high quality photo files, which are kept more locked away so they're not copied and less changes that happen to them. And then we have a separate system for the JPEGs, which are then linked to Vernon. So easily accessible, less of a worry should they get copied and eventually potentially corrupted. The more times you copy, the more times you're likely to get corruption in an image file. So we have the pathways currently linked in Vernon. Down the track, we want to link a full data management system for images so that it's a lot of a faster process. At the moment, the collection managers have to do XML uploads of all of those, and it's a multi-step process to get all the image rights and everything like that in. But once we have a dam system, that will do that automatically, is our hope. And that but we will always have firm policies around it, around how images are produced, what quality, editing, things like that. But images wise, we also have a default open policy unless it's been made closed.
Excellent. I mean, that's always a consideration for museums, that the media files that you're creating yourselves are a resource for the public, and I think there is an increasing trend towards having open licenses that allow people to reuse that material, and there's genuine evidence that that material does get more use if they're flagged with more open shareable licenses. I'll just ask a question of Joe, whether at Eromanga are you currently managing different types of external files, digital files related to the collection?
At the moment, Paul, all we've really got are pathways to images that we've got stored in our collection management files on the server. So we haven't, besides the images, we do link to some video, I guess, but we haven't. It's something that we are thinking of developing now, as we really only have 300 objects, I think, entered in the catalogue. So it's something that is a good time for us to start thinking about it.
Yes. I mean, I think managing digital files is a general challenge in museums, and it is important to try and develop procedures and processes for what you think best practice is within your organisation, that if you can write up those policies, it does make it easier as you get new staff coming in and as the collection develops. One of the challenges with natural history specimens is hazardous materials. So wet specimens, for instance, might be managed in alcohol, which is flammable, or there may be toxic materials used in the preservation of the specimens. So I wondered if any of the panelists can share how they're dealing with those hazardous materials.
Well, I can tell you that Queensland Museum is moving our entire alcohol store off-site to our off-site facility at Hendra on the north side of the city. Wow. Because our current building, which was opened in 1986, doesn't meet current fire code for the storage of solvents, especially with respect to the fact that it has a large window directly over the top of the art gallery, which they're not too fussed about. If a fire were to break out and fire burst out of this window on top of the art gallery, they wouldn't be too impressed about that. So yeah, we're building a entirely new wet store off-site for our alcohol, which will be built to the current fire standards.
Excellent. Yes, I recall at Queensland it was a challenge with the current wet store just providing access, that once the health and safety regulations were tightened up, that it wasn't even easy for collection staff to get access to that area anymore. Is there anyone else that would like to comment on the hazardous materials side of collection management?
You go.
I'm not sure who the second speaker was. You go first, Johno. I'm not sure who the second person was.
I just see a question come up about linking hazard information to files. So one of the projects happening at the museum at the moment is an inventory project. So we're going through every storeroom and trying to get a basic record. Anytime we find an object that has something to note, so if it's been asbestos treated or if it's a wet specimen that's been treated in formalin, we'd add that information to the flag field, hazard flag field. So whenever you open that record for that specimen, you'd know that there's something to check out about it. And if we do find that, we'd add a label to the specimen. But it's also about, sometimes you don't know what the deal is with it. So it's about managing that when you're checking the collections or accessing them.
Yes. Now there's a question about just spell checking in terms of data quality, and I guess that does become difficult with natural science collections because you've got so many scientific names, and often species names are unique terms that aren't going to come up again. Have any of your sites done work adding lots of those natural history terms into Vernon's text spell checker Word file to streamline that? Or is it a case that you have the spell checker turned off as part of cataloguing the natural science specimens?
I guess I'm unaware there was a spell checker, but I think how we kind of function it is we have restrictions on who does what. So for, say, our classifications, there's only set staff members who can create classifications. So for all the scientific names, and then for a lot of the fields, we have them as authority fields, so with a drop-down menu, rather than having free text. If it's something where you can do that, I would recommend doing it just so you reduce the number of things. And again, we have restricted people who can add authority fields.
There was one further question about managing that hazard information, which I can answer from a general perspective. So most of the natural history collections we work with would specifically mark things like wet specimens and would have dedicated storage areas for those. So then it might not be documenting that in detail on an individual specimen, but you would be able to retrieve all of the things which you know are wet specimens, and you would know that they're in a particular area of the museum or the stores.
Yeah, I can add to that. For Auckland Museum, we have, similar to what Johno was saying at Canterbury, we have general flags for those, and we've designed in our short object description that you get 2 exclamation marks that come up at the beginning that show there is a hazard associated with that collection item. And of course, collection access is limited to certain staff, and they undergo training in what the hazards are in collection areas.
So recording that so that it's part of the one-line display is a good approach, because that will show in that one-line summary whenever you're looking up objects. If you're wanting to add them to an exhibition record, if you're wanting to look at them in List Manager, you'll always see that flag. So we've written a solution article about that approach. If there's any museum that wants to know how to set up those kind of warning, hazard, restriction type flags, we can pass on how to do that. There was also a question about 3D files. So I wondered of the panelists, how many of you are already capturing 3D scans of specimens, and are you sharing those in any way?
At Canterbury, we've been doing a bit of work, but we haven't been using Vernon to store it. So we've got a Sketchfab ID, and that's where scans of fossils or bones are being stored at the moment. So I'm not sure what the thinking around is, how that could be incorporated into Vernon or subsequently our collections online.
I can add to that. We've worked with Historic Scotland, one of our larger UK sites, who are doing 3D scans in Sketchfab, and by putting a link to the page for that object in Sketchfab, we can automatically embed the Sketchfab player in Vernon browser. So then only if the specimen has a 3D scan, you would then see that player as part of its object page in Vernon browser and would be able to interact with that 3D model directly within the online collection site rather than going off to Sketchfab.
Mm.
Is that live, Paul? Are we able to see
So
a demo of that working?
Yep, so we are. So we can send out a link to that after this talk.
Yeah, that sounds like something great that we could show our managers of what's possible in terms of that visualization.
So the way that's done is the link is added to the external file field, and then we create a category of Sketchfab file so that we know that that's a link that is specifically a Sketchfab model, and then the Vernon browser says, well, if there is a category of Sketchfab model for this record, then show the right player. And so we've done that for other external players as well. So we've done that for SoundCloud. We've had a site that's had small audio descriptions or oral history files, but anything where there is an embeddable web player, we can, with a minimal amount of customization, embed that within the browser on an object page.
Separate to the Vernon, just some stuff that's popping up in the side panel, the questions in regards to kind of protocols around dealing with hazardous objects and things like that. We are actually in the process of setting up an Australasian natural history collection network. We're trying to get the background set up so we can bring people in. And that's kind of one of the focuses, both for kind of being able to share how we're dealing with things to kind of stop everyone having to do the same work, that we can kind of help each other build. And I think databasing will probably be a function of that as well, where people discuss how we do things across different databases. But hopefully we'll have some more news on that for all the natural science collections around there. And it's kind of great to meet Joe through this, and we can kind of send stuff to you now as well. Now we know you exist as well. Cool.
Excellent. I'll look at one of the other questions that we had, which was what kinds of external projects are the panelists sharing their data with, and if they are sharing, what data standards are underpinning that?
Well, I can say that Queensland Museum, we share with Atlas of Living Australia. There was also a bit of a push on for a while to develop a Queensland biodiversity portal to build in just a specific Queensland data set, which would be probably only accessible to policy and decision makers, so we could share pretty much everything into a password restricted space, rather than all of our nice records, curated records to ALA as we currently do. And this sort of feeds in a little bit to this idea about an Australasian natural history group, in that the development of standards or I guess focusing the development of databases, things like integration of Darwin core terminology into the actual Vernon client itself in terms of taxonomy, one, and also georeferencing would be really great. So Rebecca mentioned about making sure the georeferences were accurate within the Vernon client. So I thought one simple way would be to have functionality within the browser where staff could port those georeferences directly to a mapping engine on the web to check that it's, you know, mapping on the land. If it's terrestrial, to check that it looks right. So they can do some quality control as part of their data entry. And similarly with taxonomy, they could port the scientific name out to a web search. They could say send that to GenBank. They could send it to any number of taxonomic nomenclators to check the scientific name, authors, and those kinds of things.
So we haven't done work directly in Vernon to display the specimens on a map, but we have done integration with both Google Maps and third-party mapping GIS systems like Esri. And so they've got very powerful tools for processing hundreds of thousands of entries and allowing you to search and then present views of that. And so that's probably the best approach at this stage, is that you would take an export of data from Vernon and then import it in one of those specialized mapping applications. The advantage of something like the Esri application is that they have multiple different third-party data sets that you can then combine with that. So a geological layer map or a topographical map or a map of federal or citywide jurisdiction areas. So all of that data can then be combined and viewed in different ways within those products.
Yeah, for Auckland Museum, we do send our data to, or some of it to GBIF and then on to ALA from there. But in some of our one of our pre-meetings, Dean mentioned, I think, that you've got kind of an inbuilt system that feeds that from Vernon, because at the moment we're doing data downloads and then loading it through to GBIF, and kind of it's a time expensive process. So being able to do it automatically through Vernon would be something that would be really useful for us for that timely upload, because otherwise you aim for every 6 months, but then things pop up at the museum and it kind of gets pushed a little if you don't have someone like Dean who's in a position that that's their kind of job, managing a lot of that.
Yeah, so Queensland Museum basically has a second instance of Vernon browser running, and we basically push all our biodiversity records to that instance, and the ALA comes in and interrogates that data set, which is publicly accessible, and pulls back the relevant records.
And that second copy of Vernon browser, there's no public site for that, but the ALA project connects via an API to harvest that data. I think once a week or once a month, they go and reconnect to that server and basically copy all of those records again. And the Vernon browser site itself is updated live using the web messenger link. So as specimen records are updated and flagged as being publicly accessible in Vernon, then Vernon automatically sends that across to the hosted Vernon browser copy that we're keeping just for that natural history project.
A quick note on georeferencing is I started a little project to try and georeference New Zealand. So using the New Zealand LINS Gazetteer, the official New Zealand LINS Gazetteer, I've pulled that into Geolocate, which is a georeferencing software, and I'm trying to use the GBIF georeferencing standards to georeference every place that potentially would allow information that if you can't georeference the specific record or specimen, you could pull back to we'll probably put it in our site field, and then you can pull back and get the georeference information from that for any specimens that don't have a latitude or longitude on the label itself. And I think an integration of sort of standardized data like that into Vernon or Darwin-Core fields would be really helpful, because then it would be sort of a consistent standard that other people could use.
So both the site file and Vernon, we have more detailed records describing a place or a building even at a place, and the standard place hierarchy support georeferences. So I know at Auckland Museum, they've used the place file as a way of georeferencing social history objects. So for social history objects, often things like place made will just be named locations rather than a georeference. And they've been able to, by applying a latitude and longitude to those named places, like towns and suburbs, then figure out on a map where all the social history objects are. So those facilities are available by default in Vernon, and it's possible to go a step further quite simply by having a calculated field or symbolic field, an object, to say, oh, well, what's the location of this object based on the related place made or field collection site or whatever it happens to be relevant for that specimen. So that's again concepts that we can help individual sites with if you need further information on that. I had a question for Joe. So we've got many sites that have some natural history collections, but they don't necessarily have in-house specialist technicians or people with natural science experience. And I wondered whether you've got any tips for how you deal with that at Eromanga, how you try and bring in volunteers or people that aren't necessarily from a natural sciences background?
I mean, as to come and work in the museum, Paul?
Yes, exactly, and work directly with the collections.
So we have we've limited all Vernon data entry to the three senior staff only, just to make it to save any errors. I think basically that's our policy so far. Perhaps, you know, from now on we might look to have other people with limited ability for data entry. We do have people who have experienced with it in the past. A lot of our early entry was shown to us by QM Geosciences. So I think it's just a matter of us getting more time to be able to do it is the biggest thing. And as we open this new stage, we will have more staff. So hopefully that will become something we have more time to do ourselves, which we really want to do. We love working with it and want to learn more about it. This is great, even us learning about how to link up, you know, media files and how to 3D files. We have a lot of 3D files for our replication that we're doing. So that's something we really are keen to learn to utilise more.
And I can see from your talk, you've done some amazing work incorporating volunteers in the collecting and preparation stages where there's a lot of manual work required in those steps.
That's right. Yeah, we really, even our public preparation program where people can come and prep for a day, that's all work that we would have to do. So to a certain level, those people doing that preparation is helping us get material prepared. So it all helps. And then we have our true volunteers who come in and can work on their own. They have their projects that they do and they come in and work on whatever they're doing at the time for a week or more as they have time, which is great. And it's all progressing our collection, which is fantastic.
And so when you say that people can help prep with things for a day, so that is something that's available for visitors? They can come out and spend a day helping with that?
Yes, absolutely. So we, as part of our tourism side of the business, people can come and do a day, 18 years and over, can do a day's preparation or as many as they like. Once they've done 10 days, they're deemed to be a volunteer and they can come back for free anytime. We also run, just to make it open to everyone, a family preparation program where a family can come in and do the tour and then do just an hour's preparation on some megafauna on a jacket. And that's just, we feel, bringing the science to the public, you know, in our facility anyway. It works for us. It's really good.
Excellent, thank you. So there was also a question about managing Indigenous names. So you may have Maori names, for instance, for the same species of animals, and I wondered whether any of the panelists have done work already in Vernon to try and record those parallel naming systems.
We currently have, in at least some of the marine area, a second classification system for some of the Maori names, but we're going to need to do probably a lot more work developing it. So we have, in New Zealand, you've got Maori names, so you've got New Zealand, ones that are across all of Aotearoa New Zealand, but then you've also got iwi-specific names that ideally we would link them to their rohe, or even particularly to certain islands of a rohe or places. So this is something we're working with Ngāti Kuri on a naming project at the moment, where they're currently putting Ngāti Kuri names against the long-term idea is all species, but we're starting with endemics and taonga important to Ngāti Kuri. So we've got collecting all of the data there, including namer and date and things like that, to bring it up to what we would record for scientific classifications, to really kind of show the weight that goes behind the giving of names, and that Indigenous and local names are just as important. But I think figuring out how we can easily do mapping functions. So if we can designate a certain area, whether it be a polygon or something like that, that we can create, so you can then link that to a certain name, it would be something to be really useful, but we're very early stages still of how we bring that into a database.
Yes. Would Johno or Joe or Dean, do you have any comments on managing Indigenous names within your collections?
We don't have any at the moment in our classification. I can tell you that we store our common names of organisms in the long name, but it's kind of just it's a bit of a repurposing of a field that I'm not sure is the best place for it. I mean, there's multiple common names in some cases for different species, so it might actually be, you know, on a wish list to have a genuine common name field, or rather a table where you could actually build in a bunch of different common names and where those common names might apply, or you could build in names that are used by community or in different parts of Australia, or that are applicable, and refer to those in the classification file.
Yeah, I think being able to link language together is something that would be really important. So to kind of link where there's a dialect of a language, or there are languages that are from a certain country, or things like that. So say Cook Islands, where you've got different names from different islands, but it's still Cook Islands. So you kind of want to be able to designate it to both, to kind of show that these ones are all linked more than these ones. Yeah, it's a bit of a can of worms, but I think it will be something that will be really, really useful.
Now, there was a question that we originally had, and it's also been broached in the chat, about just the volume of data. Certainly that's a challenge within Vernon, dealing with the sheer number of records. In terms of things like rebuilding indexes, I know at Queensland Museum it takes something like 1 or 2 hours to rebuild an index, so it is still manageable. But I think if it's taking longer than that to rebuild a new index, there's probably some kind of issue there at that step that we can help work with. But that just raises the general question about whether you've got strategies for managing the sheer volume of specimens and data, and where they get all located within the museum. And I wondered what thoughts people had on that.
I think it's having those different security levels in Vernon, so who can do what, is really important when you get to those huge amounts of levels, to make sure you don't, that someone knows, I guess, what power within a database they hold and what they can do if they change something. So you're not restricting people from being able to do what they need to do, whether it be having volunteers coming in and cataloguing, because that builds their experience, makes them job ready later on, and stops double work for collection managers. But if you limit them being able to create things or delete things or do anything like that. But in terms of large level data management, I think that's an ongoing thing as we get more and more things in there. It's making sure you've got all of the background and your servers and your everything coming up to the same levels as what you're doing front of house.
Yes. Joe, I wondered, at Eromanga, are the specimens all stored on site at the moment, or do some of them get moved to a different location?
All on site, Paul, either in the holotype room, that those that are finished, which is busting at the seams at the moment, or just in the lab, all the ones that are being worked on. So no, they will all stay on site, and I guess unless they become loaned at any stage to another facility.
Do you recall how many holotypes you've identified so far?
Yes, yeah, we only have Cooper in his description. He'll be that holotype. And so far that's all with the dinosaurs. Yeah.
It's a pretty magnificent specimen, though.
Yes, he's pretty exciting.
Johno, do you have any comments about just managing the storage of such large numbers of specimens?
Yeah, I mean, the museum site is currently very full, so we're needing to expand our collection storage capabilities. From a data management point of view, we recently finished a project to catalogue a research fellow's invertebrate collection, Peter John's. It was 140,000 specimens, and that was over a 4-year period. It was lottery funded project that got data entry catalogers to come in and catalog the data from the specimens onto a spreadsheet, and those spreadsheets were imported into Vernon, but that was after a check by a curator or a manager, and then a check by the registration team, and then once they were imported in, there was a verification of every specimen matched a number, so there was no miscounts or things like that. But even in those catch processes, there were errors did occur, and some of the data, if you've got 7 or 8 different catalogers, people would enter things differently. So there's a variation, or quite a variation, on the way the data has been entered from the start of the project to the end of the project, which is quite a hard thing to manage when you're going over such a large collection over a long period of time. I think something that would help is trying to focus on authority control or using controlled ontologies, so the data's sort of standardized. But that's something you need to invest quite a lot of time in for the data entry operators at the start.
And certainly that's a reoccurring theme we see, is that for large volumes of data that are entered outside of Vernon, generally there's only a handful of staff that have the permission to import that. And I think that's actually the best way to go, because data standards are very hard to enforce in a third-party system like an Excel, which is mostly just text-based, and you need a certain level of expertise with the database and your internal standards to know what to do with the exceptions as you encounter them when you're trying to bring that data across.
Yeah, totally.
Now at this point we're out of time, so thank you very much for our panelists today. Thank you very much, Johno, Dean, Joe and Rebecca. We'll be uploading a recording of this panel today for anyone that didn't see it or wants to revisit it on YouTube. So we'll let you know once that's available. And then we'll have a number of other panels later in the week, which are all on that events page of our vernonsystems.com website. Thank you very much for coming today, and all the best for the rest of the day.